What's going on, guys? John Hasselbauer here, golf writer for thelines.com. And this is From the Tips, where we'll be going over the 2023 Honda Classic. Before we get into that, make sure you are subscribed to the Lines YouTube channel and hit the link below to get into the Lines Discord channel as well. That's where we've had all of our lively Monday morning discussion and ideally Sunday afternoon sweats, although it hasn't really been that way. The last 2 weeks with the favorites kind of asserting their dominance on the field at the Genesis and at the Waste Management the week before. As it turns out, the elevated events are where the best players in the world elevate their games, which makes it a little bit difficult for us to find value on the betting board. But nonetheless, we look forward to the Honda Classic ahead this week, where there is no Jon Rahm to worry about. Instead, the likes of Sung Jae Im and Billy Horschel and Shane Lowry are the behemoths ahead in this week's event. So perhaps a more optimistic outlook this week from the outright bombs that we love to get into. Before we talk any more about the Honda Classic, I want to look back at the Genesis Invitational. So much happening last week. Tiger Woods teeing it up and looking great. Still not great enough for me to say, go hop on a Masters future ticket, but definitely seems less impossible with the way he was hitting it. Actually, ball striking looked fantastic the whole way, and he couldn't buy a 5-foot putt or less, which you would think after the injury and everything that the putting would stay and he would have a hard time keeping the ball on the planet and all of those sorts of things. But no, it was actually, he was hitting bombs off the tee. He wasn't losing it in the way that he was in the match, which is what I was concerned about, just hitting these banana slices left and right and just laboring through it even in a golf cart. But clearly he knew he was healthy enough to play for 4 rounds at the Genesis. And I think he actually believes himself when he says that he can still win golf tournaments and that he wouldn't be playing if he didn't think he could. So that's going to be exciting to watch at the Masters. Again, I think he'll be a little oversteamed coming off of this performance. I think it was probably a top 40 in the end, and he did make the cut on the number. So we may look back on that event and think more fondly of how he performed than what actually was. But there's going to be some fun Tiger props at the Masters. I'm sure that's the next time that we will see him. And it's great to see him back on the course. It just obviously adds a whole new atmosphere to the game of golf when the best player in the world, and in my opinion of all time, is still teeing it up and competing with the rest of the best players in the world. Speaking of the best player in the world, that is definitely Jon Rahm. I was incorrect in saying that Rory McIlroy should have been the favorite or the man to beat last week. It's so clear that Rahm is the most polished all-around player in the world, and he's coming into events where he's never really been in contention before. He's always been good at them, but Waste Management and Genesis are 2 great examples, of course, is that he has good but not great history at, where he had typically been finishing top 10 and not much better, and just being in contention from Thursday to Sunday, without his best stuff. So that's what makes Jon Rahm scary right now, is he's so good off the tee. That's never going to change. Even if he's banking it off the parking lots from time to time. In general, you remember the terrible shots, but in general, he's got a cut on repeat that he's 320 in the middle of the fairway every time. So that's dangerous, and his irons are now officially clicking. He's always had great touch around the greens, and the putter was something that escaped him last year. I think he was kind of getting acclimated to that new Odyssey putter, and it took him probably over a year to get comfortable with it. He was with a TaylorMade sponsored athlete for the beginning of his entire career, and then he made the Callaway shift, and with that came a putter change. And it took him, I think, a long time to get that last piece turned around, and now it is fully turned around. You feel so much more confident when you compare Jon Rahm to Rory and Scheffler, that Rahm's going to hit these putts that you need to make. And that's really been the difference of separating himself from the other best players in the world, is when he needs to hit a putt, he does. And you kind of just feel confident that he's going to do it. He hit another bomb birdie down the stretch at the Genesis last week. And he just seems to be due for one of those to go in every time you see him. He lines it up really well, and he's confident going back to, every time he's in a situation where he needs to get a putt, he hits it. So that's dangerous. From a tee to green standpoint, it really is not that much separating Rahm from Scheffler and Rory, but again, he just has the ability to turn it on in all facets, and that's a scary thing as we get into major season, because he's clearly still young and improving season over season. So watch out for Rahm. I think this was overdue with the sort of winning drought that he had the year before, but in my mind, there's no question now he is one. And then there's a 2A, 2B with Scheffler and Rory, and then there's everybody else afterwards. So anyway, thankful to not have to worry about Rahm at the Honda Classic. As we look ahead to this field, it is not an elevated event. It is so brutally sandwiched between two elevated events in the 2 weeks before, two elevated events in the next 2 weeks with the API and the players coming after that. So it would be irresponsible for any top player to play in this event. It really would. When you compare the purses at stake this week to what's going to be in the other 4 weeks of the schedule, you talk about the players. That's an event that everybody wants to win. It has an even higher purse than the elevated events, and it has obviously almost as much prestige as a major, the closest thing to it in a non-major. So every player on tour wants to win that one. And a lot of players would be in a situation where they'd have to play 6 straight weeks leading into the players if they were to play the Honda. And you're traveling from West Coast swing to Florida swing. So this is just a natural bye week. A lot of people in the golf community talk about how golf needs some bye weeks. This is a golf bye week. I mean, if you don't want to track the Honda Classic, nobody's forcing you to. You don't have to bet this week if you don't want to. I do tend to find that the weaker sort of flyover events are the ones that present the most value. There's less sharps digging into it. The odds are a little bit softer. And there's just a lot more value to exploit, a lot more unpredictability with no world-class names in this field. But still, odds pay out the same. So even if we're not betting on Jon Rahm and let's say at 25-1 last week, you were getting Colin Morikawa, and this week you're getting Alex Noren and Adam Svensson. That's not going to feel great, but at the end of the day, value is relative to the field, and that's how we have to approach it this week. So getting into the course itself, we are going to PGA National for the first step of the Florida swing. We are in Palm Beach Gardens. We are highly exposed to the wind here and even storming conditions. It does tend to rain a lot in Florida intermittently. That was a key factor in this tournament last year, with Sepp Straka just barely getting his birdie and getting out of there on 18 to establish a one-stroke lead on that par 5 over Shane Lowry, and then the skies opened on Shane Lowry. He wasn't able to reach the green in 2. He complained about it a little bit afterwards, that he felt he got a little bit unlucky. I think there were things he could have done before the 18th hole to keep himself in contention that he failed to do. And everybody get aided from Daniel Berger just completely ejecting out of that tournament because he had a stranglehold over it and just found water every chance he could. And he's basically not been heard from since. So that's kind of interesting to monitor what is going on with Daniel Berger. He's usually at this event. And we're coming on close to like a year that we haven't seen him. So Daniel Berger, if you're out there, let us know. We are looking for you, and hope that we can see you soon, especially on the Florida swing, because that's where he's really been at his best, and he's obviously a Florida native guy. So let's see. So PGA National is 7,100 yards, but it is nothing like any of the other short courses. I wouldn't even want to call it a short course, because all of the yardage is really taken out of this course with how many dog legs and just forced layups there are by way of all of the bunkers and all of the water hazards that are in play. Think of like a concession. I think that's a perfect comp course to hear another Florida Jack Nicklaus design, that every single tee shot you're hitting, you have to decide if you want to hit towards a bunker or hit towards the water. and obviously Bermuda grass throughout. I think TPC Twin Cities, from a driving standpoint, extremely similar to this. TPC Twin Cities far easier than PGA National, and I think that's because weather is less of an issue there, and just why more forgiving greens and like rough that's going to keep you from rolling into the water as long as you don't like completely slice it over there. So I don't love TPC Twin Cities as a comp because it's more of a birdie fest for sure. I believe that's par 72, so you can score a lot more in the par fives. At PGA National, there's only 2 par fives, 18th being one of them, and if the wind is blowing at all, that's a really difficult hole to reach into. So I think it's really a bogey avoidance week. Par is a good score. Cut line is always over par here. So if you just hit greens of regulation, 2-putt your way through this course, you're going to do just fine. There's not really, outside of the par fives, I don't think there's a hole on this course that averages under par. So it's not like even a Riviera where you step up to the 10th hole and you say, this isn't a par 5, but I've got a nice birdie opportunity here. It's really not a hole like that. So you're going to have to hit a couple long putts for birdie here if you want to score. You have to be comfortable on Bermuda. I'm looking at just general course history on Bermuda courses in this Florida area. Bermuda can be a little misleading if you're looking at like Waste Management's technically considered Bermuda. The stadium course where we have the Amex is technically considered Bermuda. It's more desert and dormant. That's not at all the types of conditions we have here, where it's a little bit more like swampland, grainy Bermuda that you're used to seeing in the Southeast. And I would even extend that to like a TPC Southwind in Memphis and Sanderson Farms in Jackson, Mississippi. Like anywhere where basically like the SEC territory. I don't know a better way to describe that region of the U.S., but anywhere where the SEC schools are playing, if there's Bermuda there, that's where I'm looking for recent results, past success. And I think it's especially important this week when we're coming off of the West Coast swing. A pretty good opportunity to buy low on some guys who were ball striking it really well, but short game wasn't quite there. I mean, short game at Riviera on Poa Greens and Kikuyu Rough compared to short game at PGA National, where everything is sort of tight runoffs, Bermuda throughout. You almost can't compare them. It's so different. A lot more tight lies here. Totally different game. You'll see a lot more like Texas wedges, tight runoffs that you're going to putt from off the green. That counts as an around the green stat. So just a kind of a different game. So course history is important. I'm looking more at comp course history and history in Florida in general, just because there's so much randomness that comes in here when weather's at play, and this water is in play. Like you can have it a good round, and then all of a sudden you double by hitting it into the water, and your round's completely derailed. So course history is not the end all be all for me this week, but a combination of good ball striking and past success on Bermuda. I want those two things to be, it's simple, but if you are coming in here in ball striking form and you've proven to be familiar, ideally from Florida, but familiar with good repeated results on Bermuda courses, just those two things together is really the basis of what I'm looking for here. It's hard to feel very confident about the top of the board when you look at the presumptive favorites this week. Obviously, Sungjae Im is the number one man this week. He was a 2020 winner here, followed that up with another top 10, but a miscut in 2022. He's about, I guess you can find him as long as 10-1 now, which is actually not a horrible price. You can find him as short as plus 750. So those are the same odds you saw Rahm at last week. Again, it's kind of interesting to see. If you weren't betting Rahm at 750, why would you bet Sungjae at 750? Is my sort of perspective on it. And then basically double the odds of him as Shane Lowry, your next favorite in this field. And so it's basically Sungjae in a class of his own. I don't love Lowry here, even though he was a runner-up the year before. I would like to see a little bit better form for somebody under 20-1. A couple miscuts before a good top 20 showing at Riviera. So I'll probably be a fade on Lowry this week. And then you've got a really uncomfortable mix of players in the 20 to 30 range, and that includes these non-winners, I guess we'd have to call them. Aaron Wise, Alex Noren, Denny McCarthy, Chris Kirk, Minwoo Lee, Horschel, Vegas, and my guy Kuchar. So none of that's going to feel good, but that's kind of the nature of what this week is. So in general, when I look to bet this week, it was hard for me to stomach any of those guys in the 25-1 range. I'm not going to lie. I know it's relative. I know you're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable betting these sorts of weeks and stomach some really just bad odds. Like Chris Kirk, I love him here, but 24-1, what are we doing? I can't do that. So for me, this was going to have to be a longer card. I think I had a total of about nine outrights this week. I think that's a good segue into my model itself. So let me pull up the Honda Classic sheet here. Cool. So I want to start with my model, how I built the model. And let me get that there. Okay, cool. So as I said, Sungjae Im is the deserving favorite. He's number one on my model. I think it would be hard to run a model and not have Sungjae be number one. The rest of my top 10 for this week is Ben Griffin, Alex Noren, Shane Lowry, Ben Taylor, Chris Kirk, Charlie Hoffman, interesting, Thomas Dietrich, Danny Lee, who is now on the Ironheads, so that makes Eric Van Rooyen slide into that now 10 spot in the model. And then to just quickly go into how the model was sort of composed. Comp conditions, as I said, that's going to be difficult scoring conditions, Bermuda conditions, course history, other comp courses where difficult off the tee shots are going to come into play, and wind exposed courses on the coast. And then just general difficult scoring conditions. And then I put bogey avoidance and double bogey avoidance in here. Double bogey avoidance is a stat that really never really matters. But when you're playing a course like PGA National that has one of the highest penalty shot percentages on the PGA Tour, double bogey avoidance is really going to be like a proxy for players who can walk onto a tee shot and say, there's water on the left, I got to take left out of play. I can't, I'll miss right, but I'm not going to miss left. That's easy for some players to do. It's not easy for other players to do. But double bogey avoidance typically correlates well with like the most accurate drivers, guys who aren't going to get them in trouble on their first tee shot. And obviously like good approach players too, who are probably going to hit the greens. That's not a revolutionary take, but ball striking is important here. And if you're a good ball striker, you're probably not going to get into too much trouble with bogeys as long as you're not 3-putting or 4-putting. So after the comp conditions approach, anytime we're playing on a course with a lot of water, it's super important to mitigate your misses and make sure that if you need to hit the green, you do, and that you are not battling a slice that's going to put you on the follow-up drop area. So strokes gained approach, very important. Strokes gained ball striking, I think, is a little bit more important than just general off the tee here. And then proximity from 125 to 200 and showing all of the sub ranges in there. That is 30% of the model. And then around the green for 13%, around the green and scrambling. Scrambling is actually something that's super correlated here over the years. Anytime we're on a difficult scoring course where -10 is enough to win, scrambling tends to be important. You're going to have to get up and down for pars a bunch. So scrambling is a stat that's going to capture both your short game, your getting up and down ability, but it's also sort of a putting stat, or you're going to have a 5-foot putt and you need to hit those. And then for miscellaneous, I was looking at recent form over the last 12 rounds, over the last 3 events. How have you been doing? That's something where in a field like this where it's not as strong, you might be able to catch a couple like, oh, I didn't realize he was doing that well. So players like Joseph Branlett, Adam Schenk, Robbie Shelton is interesting, Peter Malnati. Brandon Wu, even. These are all players that wouldn't come to mind as the hottest players in the field to me personally. But if you look over a more recent sample size, it becomes a little bit more telling of who's sort of like trending going into this event. And then off the tee and putting, I didn't know that they're not significantly important stats, and putting is something I'm going to be looking more at the Bermuda putting stat. But you don't want people who are hopeless on the green, so I put a very small weight on putting, and off the tee. Tough to use that in a vacuum, because if you're a pure bomber or you're a pure fairway finding specialist, neither of those things are really ideal here. It's more about like keeping yourself out of trouble. So that is the model in general. And now to go to who I bet this week. We will start from the top here. So I have 9 guys on my outrights card this week. Again, that's a function of me not really feeling excited about anybody under 25 to 1. The Norins, the Svensons, the Kirks of the world, those are all guys that popped in my research, popped in the model. I was hoping they would be 30 or 35 to 1. If they were, I'd probably bet them. But they weren't. They were a lot shorter than that. And it's not to say that's a misprice, but it's just not a price that I felt like there was much value on. So I started my card with Matt Kuchar. He was the spotlight feature in my tournament preview article, which you can find in the description down below. And happy to get him at 28. I was hoping there'd be a 30, but anything in 25 to 30 range, I was going to bet on Kuchar this week. Picked up his first win here in 2002. And hasn't played here since 2011. I'm hoping to figure out why that is in the press this week of what was the cause to break the 12-year drought. But in any case, he's playing well. If I had to guess or assume why he's here, I think he's getting older and realizing that he's not a guarantee to make the FedEx Cup playoffs. And so when he puts his schedule together, he has to take advantage of some of these weaker fields where he can still go out and win. That is definitely the case this week. I think he is a top 5 favorite on most books. So to get 28 to 1 odds on a top 5 favorite, that's not always going to happen again. Last week, you might have had like Justin Thomas as a top 5 favorite, and he was like 18 to 1. So that alone, I think, makes good value. He's from Florida, always plays well on Bermuda greens, a guy who, from a short game perspective, his game kind of stands on its own. You can see he's number 1 on Bermuda comp courses, top 10 on putting in these Florida Bermuda courses. And the course history is dated, but when he has come here, albeit decades ago, he is very strong. So my next bet, Sepp Straka. I would have put him in the same class as projected betting odds, as like a Svensson, a Norin, a Kirk. The defending champion here, I was really surprised to see him slip all the way to 50. So this is a value bet for me, not a guy that was fixed on my card like Kuchar was, regardless of odds. But I would have expected like a 35 to a 40 on Straka as the defending champ. Did not come into this event with really any form. I feel like his win came out of nowhere in 2022, and he's had a little bit better signals this year. He's climbed his way up to 30th in the world, finished runner-up at the Sanderson Farms, finished runner-up in a playoff to Zalatoris at TPC Southwind for the FedEx St. Jude. So it's not to say he won and then fell off the planet. Like he shows up, and he's a player that I love as an outright. I don't even know if I'll play him in DFS. I'm not going to play him as a placement bet because I think there's so much volatility with him. But obviously he can spike here. He's capable of winning here. We could have a KH Lee situation where he just shows up once a year and it's on these exact layouts of courses. And every time he comes back, he plays well. I believe he had a top 30 finish before his win last year as well. So it wasn't a flash in the pan, at least at PGA National. But anytime he is on Bermuda greens, it seems like Straka is capable of contending all of a sudden. He also gained, I want to say, like 5 strokes on approach at the Century Tournament of Champions. He hasn't been playing a ton this year, but even though the results aren't there, anybody who's able anybody who's capable of gaining that many strokes on approach in that field is impressive. So I think the form is not as far away as people may think, and it's a great value. Ben On, Course history play, number one in strokes gained total at PGA National. Great driver of the golf ball, great scrambler. Not a great putter. I think that's the one thing that's held him back. But it's turning around a little bit. He was in contention at the Sony before like a triple on the 10th hole on Sunday. So the game's pretty close. He's actually like a surprising bomber, which I don't think I have driving distance in here, but for 65-1 to get the number one course history player, I'll take my chances there in a very weak field. Hayden Buckley. Hayden Buckley is somebody who I love this week. Talk about the SEC courses. He went to Missouri, has been playing these sort of SEC area, Bermuda, Florida area courses throughout college. He's now in his second year on the PGA Tour. And all of his best results have come on Bermuda. His four best results are between the Sanderson Farms and the Sony Open. And he most recently finished runner-up to Siwoo Kim at the Sony Open, where you could tell he just had the driver dialed up on repeat. That'll do here. If you're elite off the tee, that's going to set up a lot of opportunities here. We've seen you go down the list of winners here even, and Sung J M, Keith Mitchell, Ricky Fowler, Rory McIlroy, Justin Thomas at that time. These are all guys who had complete control over their drives. I think Adam Scott as well is a winner here. So all players who, answer like the first thing you have to do on each hole is put yourself in position, not make a penalty. And you should feel pretty good about Buckley being able to do that. And short game on Bermuda seems to be a strength of his game. So 71, one of my favorite values on the board. I thought he might be closer to like 50. Joseph Bramlett, trending ball striker, also trending putting. He's been about level putting the last couple weeks, picked up a couple top 15s in his last two starts. So the form alone, I think, is worth the price. We saw before. I want to say he's third. He's third in recent form. Seventh in scrambling. That's really interesting for a guy like Bramlett, who has a reputation for not being able to putt. And he's not missing greens. He's actually number one in greens in regulation. So if you're number one there and you're top 10 in scrambling, that's a great recipe for here when all you really need is pars. This is not a putting contest. So that makes me feel a lot better about Joseph Bramlett. Definitely has that sort of Luke List profile of somebody who can, gain a ton of strokes on the field, ball striking to the point where if you're just level with your short game, you're going to put yourself in position on a difficult course to contend. Okay, I'll breeze through the bottom here because these are more just flyers, but S.H. Kim has played well on the short courses, was in contention at the Sony, which is a good comp and a good indicator of recent weeks leading in. Same thing can be said about Ben Taylor, someone who gains across all four categories of off the tee approach around the green and putting. Putted great at the Sony, which is the last time we saw him on Bermuda. So that might be an encouraging sign. Somebody that at 7,200 as well on DraftKings, I think is one of the better values here. And he was number 5 in my model this week. So, does well on Bermuda comps, bogey avoidance, double bogey avoidance, keeps the ball in play, and can sort of score in a bunch of different areas being so well-rounded. So, like Ben Taylor's prospects this year, and triple-digit odds in this field I think is too good to pass up. My next bet is going to be Dylan Fratelli here at 130-1. Read it out very well in my model, top 30 there. Multiple top 20 finishes at the Honda Classic. And coming in pretty good form. Did just miss the cut on the number at the Genesis, but before that had a couple top 40 finishes. Someone who has multiple top 5s in majors and has proven that he can contend in difficult conditions. The off-tee game seems to be trending in the right direction, which is always good for PGA National. My last bet is going to be Kyle Westmoreland. He has become sort of my guy here. I keep going back to him at like the longest odds on the board, but he's so consistent on approach, which is very rare for somebody who's a driving distance specialist like Westmoreland, who's always going to be top 10 in the field in driving distance, but he's also super consistent on approach. I think in his last 7 or 8 consecutive measured events, he's gained strokes on approach. He's not a dominant approach player. He's not going to gain 5, 6, 7 strokes in an event, but he steadily gains a stroke or two on approach. And especially for like a top 40 consideration. I think that's perfect. And when you go into a course like this, yes, it's 7,200 yards or 7,100 yards. Yes, it's not a pure bombers course. It is positional. But that just means he's going to have more like 5 irons off the tee where other guys are hitting 3-wood or even a full driver. So I kind of like that here. I like that he has that option to dial it back. That is my full card. That is all 9 players. It's a volatile week, so you never know what you're going to get. But I like the squad that we've put together. It is a full squad. So hopefully, Sung Jae Im doesn't pull a John Rahm and take this event by the horns. That's going to do it for me at the Honda Classic. Thank you guys, as always, for listening in, and best of luck with your Honda Classic bets this week.